All right. What is going on with my camera? It looks so smudgy. Okay, this is great for video. Ready? And it's better. Okay. Very high tech product that we're running here. Got on a tad bit early. That's okay though. It's just that way. Oh, I think we might have a little visitor coming to hang out. Can you hear him? What? Yes, I'm also mom. You got Cat in the Hat? My little homeboy. He's got his getting ready for bath time. Let's see here. Well, there's that. I'm doing all of the share. There it is. Copy link. Doing all the necessary promotional stuff. That's why I went ahead and got on a tad bit early. Here we go. Dead silence. Great for video content and audio, especially. At least on video, you can look at my face. Paste. There we go. Cool. Boom. There's that. Okay. Well, welcome. I'm your host, Brandon Knight, and this is My Seminary Life Live. We've been going for about a minute and a half now, but I got on a little bit early just so that way I could get some things fired up here and also clean my camera. For those of you dropping in for the very first time, My Seminary Life is a weekly podcast that you can catch wherever you get your podcasts every Saturday morning on your favorite platform. The show focuses on topics and subjects that you would normally have covered in the seminary classroom, but delivered in a way that would be for everybody. Delivered in a way that would be for everybody, not just for the quote theological elites, but to try and bring a bit of intellectualism of Christianity back to everybody. So that's what we do. The show's been around for, we're just now started our third year. Back in March was our anniversary. And my angry producer is over here telling me to get my act together. Every so many we have a number of goals here on the show, and how it works is that every time we hit one of these goals during a year, we do a live stream. We do a little live stream bonus episode that goes along with the overarching series topic. Right now we're in a series called Apologetics 201. It's running started in early April, gonna be running all the way till the end of May. A little bit more on that here in a second. And so how it works, if you're into this whole live stream video format, if you like your podcast visual, you can do a few things to make these happen more often. And the easiest one is to listen to the show, listen to My Seminary Life every Saturday, like I said earlier. Also, since you're right here, hit that subscribe button if you haven't yet already. That's another goal, is to raise the number of subscribers we have here on the YouTube channel. Following the show on Facebook and Instagram at My Seminary Life Pod. And financially supporting the show, whether that's by buying merch or by supporting our monthly support tier over at buymeacoffee.com/MSL pod. You can support the show monthly. There's a couple different options there. And yeah, every time that those goals go up, we do more live streams. That's how it works. This is a reward system we have here. So, like I said earlier, we are in a series right now called Apologetics 201. Last year, during 101, I was focusing more on the what is apologetics, and dealing with some of the major topics that are typically addressed in the apologetics sphere, like the existence of God, the problem of pain, things like that. This go around, we're a little bit more narrowly focused on the relationship between faith and science. because it is often seen more as one versus the other rather than a relationship coming together as one. And I closed the tab, but I definitely should pull this up. Just this past Saturday on the show, if you haven't gotten a chance to check it out yet, Joe Day from Buddy Walk with Jesus and Christian Ashley from Let Nothing Move You was on the show, and we discussed creation theories. Of course, the two biggies being 6 day literal creationism and a few of its spin-offs and counterparts, but also evolution, which is the other big guy, but also looking at a number of the other ways that Christians have understood Genesis chapter 1 and 2. And I just put a link for it in the comment section if you haven't checked it out yet. It's a doozy. I think it's the longest episode I've ever done here on the show. It's almost 2 hours long. It's like an hour 45, I think. I don't even like listening to podcasts that long, but I like short, like 45-minute shows. But I encourage you to go check that one out, especially in relation to this conversation that we're having today on the movie Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed, because this is going to correlate to this, and also a topic that I covered on the show a couple weeks ago, the clockmaker illustration. We'll be talking about all that as we review the movie Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed. So, for those of you who are maybe unfamiliar with this movie, it is actually very easy to find. Open up a separate tab, pull YouTube back up, search into YouTube Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed full film, and it will be right there. Actually, not two different movies, but like there's at least two videos up of the movie in its entirety. If you haven't yet, sorry, it's bath time. Bath time can sometimes be a little rough. um but so this movie is written, starred, and also slash narrated, because it is a documentary by Ben Stein. He's grumpy. He's a grumpy little boy. By Ben Stein, not Ben Stein. Ben Stein's not a grumpy little boy. He's deadpan. I'm talking about producer Cooper. He is quite grumpy right now. When it comes to Ben Stein, in case you don't know it, Bueller, 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 that guy. Okay. Comedian, actor. He was in The Mask, I believe, and a few other just like random appearances. Had a game show where you could win his money, but started out in the political world. He was a lawyer and also a speechwriter for Nixon and Gerald Ford. So kind of his a very eclectic background, and he is a part of this documentary that analyzes the scientific world and its treatment of the theory of intelligent design. So this movie is about an hour 40, about as long as that podcast episode I just released. It's about an hour 40 long, and it has a whopping 11% on Rotten Tomatoes. For all of you who care about Rotten Tomatoes scores, it's got about 11% freshness on Rotten Tomatoes. And we'll talk about maybe some of the reasons why it has that. Why it has that rating. It came out in 2008, and I totally remember watching this movie. I think it wasn't long after it came out in school. So I went to a small Christian middle school and high school, and based off of my memory of where I watched it at, I must have been in high school when we watched it. And as part of science class, actually, no, I take that back. It may have actually been like a chapel service that we watched it. It was either chapel or science. We ended up watching this as Ben Stein investigates why are people so anti-intelligent design. So getting right to the film itself, It's a little quirky, it's a little tongue in cheek, just trying to, like, not even talk about the content for a moment. It's a little quirky, it's a little tongue in cheek. It's a good runtime, it doesn't feel long. Um, it's Ben Stein, so even when he's being serious, when he's just so dry and deadpan, it is funny. Um it has a killer soundtrack. I don't know. They must have, like, spent all their money on the soundtrack because it's got a really good, like, almost, like, noteworthy to buy the soundtrack. It's, like, probably my biggest takeaway from this documentary is that it has a killer soundtrack. But, so as a piece of, like, film, it's good, it's watchable, um, but it very much positions itself as evolution and evolutionists, I should say. Evolutionists is gatekeeping the scientific community and world from intelligent design and those who follow in the intelligent design theory of creation. That there was an intelligent designer behind everything that we got. Again, like we talked about a few weeks ago with the clockmaker illustration, this idea that if you came across a random pocket watch in the middle of a forest, you would know that it was not original to the forest, first off, and that as you inspected it and saw all the mechanisms inside of it, you would conclude that something would have had to put all of that together in order for it to work. Even if it's, like, not running, the fact that it's so intricate as a mechanism would imply that there had to be some kind of designer behind it all, and that's this idea of intelligent design. Never once do they actually say all of that, which is one of the big critiques against this documentary that I have. But I'm sorry, it's bedtime. Parents know what's up. It's, you take a bath, it's sometimes fun, it's sometimes grumpy, and then it's, if it's grumpy, then it's even grumpier than to get out of the bath and get to bedtime. So bear with us. I might even have to, like, have him come over here and have him calm down for a moment. We'll see. But Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed starts with literally the building of the Berlin Wall. That is how this documentary starts, with, like, film footage of the Berlin Wall being built. And this is, like, a reoccurring theme throughout the movie of basically evolutionists have built a wall up against those who follow more of a intelligent design philosophy and theory of creation. That and this is, like, a theme that keeps running throughout, that there is this wall and it is compared to the Berlin Wall. I mean, even by the end of the movie, you have the Mr. Gorbachev tear down this wall speech from Reagan as kind of like the big send off for the film of, like, now we must rise up and tear down the wall of scientific gatekeeping, because I don't know what else to call it. After the very dramatic opening of the Berlin Wall being built, Ben Stein conducts a series of interviews where he is talking to professors from universities who were expelled, meaning that they were dismissed. They were fired, they were silenced, whatever, because they were promoting intelligent design in the classroom. Ben Stein even goes on to interview major evolutionists, including Richard Dawkins. He's in the documentary to kind of get a better understand of, like, why is it so bad for somebody to teach intelligent design. And he traces a very interesting thread of the use of evolution in by different people, or the use of teachings that are similar to evolution by other people. This video is going to be demonetized by the end of this because I have to say some words. Not that I make any money off of these anyway, but ultimately this movie concludes with this idea that there is this wall, and those who follow intelligent design need to work together to break down the wall that separates the two. This is actually not so much a documentary about what is intelligent design as it is a documentary about this divide, this gatekeeping between evolution and the rest of us, the rest of the people who are like intelligent design peeps. Good night, son. It's a live show. Deal with it. So, what? What does this documentary do well? And what does this documentary not do well? Well, I will go to one of the does not do well, as I stated earlier, is the fact that it's never actually very clearly communicated what intelligent design is. There's very little done to actually lay the groundwork as to what is intelligent design and why is it uh, a reasonable alternative, maybe is the best way to put it, to evolution. How is it a reasonable alternative? It's really just an assumption made that you know what intelligent design is and that you know that it is a reasonable alternative to evolution, which to me then implies that this movie is for insiders. This movie was made for like a very specific group of people who already know and probably agree that intelligent design is a reasonable alternative to evolution, versus trying to like present an argument for intelligent design by explaining what it is. Do you know what I'm saying? Like it's very much insider information here. It's insider baseball here. It's very much like the people who are going to see this movie, which by the way, it was one of the highest grossing documentaries of all time for a very long time. Ironically, the production company who made it went bankrupt like a year after it was made and sold all of their films at auction. And some like anonymous person now owns the rights to this film, which is probably why it's free on YouTube. Anyway, so it's very much, it's clear that this is made for a specific group of people, and that group of people are going to be the people who agree that yes, intelligent design is a reasonable alternative to evolution, and that there is this dividing wall between evolution and everybody else who doesn't agree with evolution. So it's kind of this one of so it's kind of this one of two things here, because it does do a very bad job of explaining what intelligent design is, but it does do a good job of communicating clearly that intelligent design and six-day creationism are not the same thing. They can go hand in hand in the fact that um, intelligent design is often used as an apologetic tool for the argument of the existence of God, a teleological argument for the existence of God. But much like the watchmaker illustration, and I talked about before, Karl Barth's understanding of general revelation versus specific revelation, these kind of things can only get you so far. Intelligent design can only point you to the fact that there is a designer, an uncaused cause, if we go back to Greek philosophy, who put all of this into motion. In some cases, you might not even be able to get to that point. There is room for being able to argue for a eternal mechanism. The universe is this eternal, always existing mechanism that will just run and run and run until it runs out. People have made that argument as well. But even if you can make the argument for the existence of God, really you're just making an argument for the existence of a God, and you're definitely not getting to you're a sinner in need of salvation. Jesus is the savior of the world. We're not even close to getting to that point. All we have gotten to is, if we're going to use intelligent design as an apologetic tool to argue for the existence of God, we are literally only getting that far, that God does exist. Probably you can get that far. Although, as I've talked about before, there is this element within apologetics, or at least how we do apologetics often in Western Christianity, of we are starting at a place where we know where we want to get to. So we are going to navigate the argument and navigate the conversation to get to this point here. We learned how to argue to get to, we know the starting point, we know where we want to get to, and we have learned how to argue to get to that point. And maybe we should be doing apologetics better than that, but I digress. Let's go back to the movie now. So does expelled no intelligence allowed do a good job of explaining what is intelligent design? No. Does it do a good job of trying to show that like intelligent design, 6-day creationism, not necessarily the same thing? They can both be independent parties away from each other. Yes, they do that well. And I think it's important to note at this point that Ben Stein is not really necessarily arguing for Christianity in this film. He is arguing for intelligent design, yes, but I think really the ultimate purpose of this film is to make an argument that with this gatekeeping, this is stepping on um, freedoms that we have as an American: freedom of speech, freedom of religion. I guess I don't know if this is technically a freedom by like constitutional standards, but the freedom to be able to teach, I guess I might be able to fall under free speech. Um, so that's really what this is. The argument is for. If there's an argument being made, it is an argument that this wall exists. Intelligent design should be treated as a reasonable alternative to evolution, and that to not allow it to be a reasonable alternative to evolution, you are stepping on my freedoms as an American, because it seems like it always comes back to you're stepping on my freedoms as an American. That seems to be always what these things come back to. What is something that this documentary does well? Well, like I said, it does a good job of showing how intelligent design, although it never really defines it, is not necessarily the same as 6-day creationism. I think another thing that this documentary does actually do well is show how complex everything is. And normally we say that to mean that life is complex, sigh, but like no, like the how everything is made up, like it really is mind-blowing just how complex molecules and cells and all of this. It's just it does a good job of showing just how complicated all of this really is. How intricate everything is and how just beautiful it truly all is. It's there is this conversation that takes place in the film of understanding like or they're talking about how Darwin understood the molecule when he was writing on the origin of species versus how we understand the molecule now. And I put now in air quotes because remember, this movie came out in 2008. So it's been almost 20 years since this movie came out. And the scientists who answer this question, he asked this question to a variety of different people. And I think they come from like different like perspectives as well, is that if Darwin understood the molecule, the cell, to be a Buick, how we understand it now is that it is this complicated, like supercomputer. You know, just like this, it's not even close. Darwin had no fathomable understanding of like how complicated all of this is. And I think that this is one of those moments where we as Christians, whether you're like a very strict 6-day literal creationism but person, or especially particularly if you are like on the theistic evolution side of things, that we really need to give Darwin a break. That's right, folks. I'm gonna say it. Charles Darwin needs a bit of a break, because this is the big thing about science, is that it is, as time goes on, new knowledge is gained. That's the simplest way to put it. New tests are done. New ways to test things are developed so we can have more accurate understanding of things. And it is kind of obvious that like Darwin has these points in on the Origin of Species that just doesn't hold up anymore because it was written like 200 years ago or something. And I guess it's not quite 200 years ago because I think it was the late 1800s when it was written. But like we hold Darwin as like this evil person who like either as an evil person or as a person who had it all figured out. And both aren't necessarily true. Like he was a scientist making observations and recording them. And you know what? Over time, some of this was proven wrong. We were able to understand things better. And I think this is where Christians have a hard time with trying to bring faith and science together because we treat scripture, and there are portions of our faith that are definitely like this, where it's like solid truth. It cannot change. This is gospel truth. The gospel is a good example of that. But with science, new tests are done, new information is learned, we expand our knowledge, and so maybe it feels a little bit more shaky because new things we can discover new things, right? Whereas we treat our faith very much as like this black and white, very linear, like we know it all. It's all right there. There is no new information. It's probably why some of the guys who I swim with in this podcast circle who are a little bit more progressive are usually tossed under the bus because they're working with new ideas versus old teachings or things that we think are old that but aren't actually old, like rapture theology. That is like maybe not groundbreaking, but like new information, new perspectives. Whereas with science, that's like kind of common part of the gig is like new information. And I think for Christians, that's part of the issue is that it's rubbed the wrong way of like new information. Well, then what is truth? Because it's all relative because it's going to change anyway. Like, relax. Watching this documentary showed that reminded me, I already kind of knew this. I took science classes, but it reminded me of just how beautifully complex everything really is. And that is something to celebrate for us as Christians, that it's so like as somebody who would say that God created everything and does make a little bit of room for some of these like evolutionary scientific like developments that we now have, it is a way to better understand who God is and just like the complex detail that he put into these things, that we're not just like, you know, paper dolls, right? Like I mean, compared to him, we are, but like the universe, our planet, us, all the animals, the plants, everything, like it's all so complex and it's so beautiful. God could have just made it so bland, and yet it's so like that is, in the Psalms when David is like, who am I that you are mindful of me, as he's looking up at the stars and having this existential crisis of like, who am I that you are mindful of me, and like reminding himself of who he is within the created order, especially in relation to God. Like that actually that happened for me a little bit as I was watching this documentary. So for that and the soundtrack, I would say it's definitely worth watching. But there is a lot of negatives about this film. There is some documented either misuse of information or manipulation that went into the producing of this film. The major evolutionists who were involved in this documentary were pitched that they were going to be on a documentary called Crossroads that was dealing with the relationship between faith and science and how science is better than religion. That's how they were able to get a lot of these people to be on the documentary. They pulled the old bait and switch, literally the bait and switch. I've never made a documentary. Thought has crossed my mind. I've never made a documentary. I know people who have. I don't think that's standard procedure to lie to people to get them to be on your documentary. And if it is, probably shouldn't do it either way because that's like not cool. Lying isn't cool, especially in this regards. Deception's not cool. Anyway, so there's that. There's also a famous quote from Charles Darwin. It comes from The Descent of Man that is quoted in this documentary. And it was actually also one of the reasons why it's famous is not that it's from Darwin, but also because it was used in the Snopes trial, this famous trial in, I believe it's Tennessee, where evolution was being taught in a school, and they were taken to court, and it was a whole thing. And this quote that was used in the trial and in the documentary um, is out of context and heavily edited to make it sound like Darwin is arguing for the genocide of people, those who cannot keep up with us civilized people. Although I don't know if I would fall under the civilized people with all the mental health issues, but besides the point. Um, the thing about this quote is that it's actually massively taken out of context. That Darwin isn't saying that it's a good thing that this is happening, but is actually saying that it is a good development of our morality that we do take care of people who would normally like be considered weak by evolutionary standards. But it's ripped completely out of context and heavily edited to make it sound like otherwise. Also, like I said at the beginning of the film, Stein sits down with a number of professors who taught or spoke about intelligent design in the classroom and then were released from their position at their universities. And there's a lot of conflicting information out there. It's definitely a he said, she said kind of situation where the professors are crying out against the universities, and the universities have what appears to be very reasonable reasons for releasing them. In one case, a professor was brought up intelligent design and was teaching it in the classroom, and then was not granted tenure. I think that was at Iowa State University, and Iowa State University did double down. And it's actually like in the documentary of them doubling it down, saying, "Yeah, we don't want to be associated with intelligent design." But also another reason why they did not grant him his tenure was because up until he like got into his position there at Iowa University, this person was like making new discoveries and writings and all of that, and then got to Iowa University and basically coasted, just to kind of like put it into my lingo. Basically coasted, wasn't really getting grant money from anyone else, wasn't really contributing anything. So when it came time for his review, they were like, yeah, no, you're not really contributing anything here. Another person, and I found this one to be very interesting. Another professor claimed that she just brought up intelligent design in a lecture, and that the university fired her and then blackballed her so that way she could not get a job anywhere outside of or could not get a job anywhere within the world of the education, higher education world. Apparently that's all like not made up, but false. So she wasn't fired. She was on a class by class basis with the university on a non-tenure track. And with that, the university is under no obligation to necessarily renew your contract and have you teach more classes. Maybe you're just filling in for like a semester or something. My friend Jonathan is doing that right now with Vanderbilt. There's like no necessarily obligation that Vanderbilt is going to bring him on full time and give him tenure and all that. He's just teaching a class right now there. So it wasn't necessarily that she was fired as she presents in this documentary, but they got to the end of the class, her time teaching there, and opted not to renew her contract and not to have her teach the class. She also wasn't blacklisted from teaching higher education. She actually found another job within higher education teaching science. And she taught that lecture at this. I know I say science and it's much more complicated than that, but just I'm a simpleton. Go with me on that. And she taught that lecture at this other university. It took her like 2 or 3 years to find a new teaching job. And she taught this lecture, and she didn't just mention intelligent design. It was a whole thing about how intelligent design is the way to go, and 6-day creationism teachings and rhetoric, and like the whole 9 yards. So, and even if you necessarily agree with those teachings, I would hope you could also agree that that was deceptive. They deceived the audience into thinking that she was like basically lost her whole entire career and way of life, when in actuality she didn't. And she lied about how much this is like brought up in the lecture. So yeah, some difficulties with this documentary in the way of being honest, in the way of not necessarily manipulating information, you know? Um, Another big part of this documentary is that, and I think for Christians, this is an important one to understand, is that when you trace back some of the uses of evolution throughout history, you see a comparison between the teachings of evolution, especially this idea of like weaker people within the evolutionary system, and how the Nazis treated people, and the Holocaust. And Ben Stein is a Jewish man, and so this was a very difficult part. You definitely can like feel the tension when he gets to this part. And there's people who, there's like, they went to a Holocaust, not the Holocaust museum, but to a Holocaust museum, and in Germany, at one of the concentration camps where they were doing like these horrific experiments on people. And the person in charge was like, "Oh yes, Hitler and his scientists were definitely, heavily influenced by evolution." And I'm not an expert on that, so I can't necessarily say if that's true or not. But one thing I've started realizing is just how much the Nazis also misused scripture and Christianity for their agenda. As it was, I'm I'm no World War II history buff, but I do really like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and I've been spending a lot more time learning about him, and subsequently having to understand better the context of Germany and during World War II, and the rise of the Nazis in the 30s. And you know, you had the German Christian Party, and the Christian nationalism within Germany, and like, they had their own version of the Bible that didn't have the Old Testament and made Jesus Aryan. Like, there's a whole thing going on here with the Nazis. And um so yeah, if evolution, or excuse me, if Darwin's teaching on evolution heavily influenced the the Nazis, scientists, and Hitler, we also have to look in the mirror and remember that, yeah, and also they use scripture to justify a lot of their anti Semitism as well. Like, this is sadly a part of our history too. So, and that doesn't come up because that's not necessarily the point. It's not like, again, it's not necessarily like Ben Stein's trying to argue for Christianity in this documentary, but it's also important to remember our stuff was also used to do horrific things to people. So, what's the punchline here? Is it worth watching? Sure. Go watch it. Like I said, it's free. It's on YouTube. Killer soundtrack. It does lead you a little bit into awe of just like the beauty and complexity of everything around us, everything within us. And I think maybe we should be a little bit more open minded to how science can lead us to worship. Ooh, maybe that should be a series. Science leading us to worship. Science. Bill Nye. By the way, the runner-up idea for doing this live stream was to go back and rewatch the debate between Bill Nye and Ken Ham. And if you want that, um, yeah, drop in the comments and let me know. Maybe we can circle back to that at some other time. But what do we walk away with here other than a documentary that doesn't really help us understand what intelligent design is, but it is a reasonable alternative apparently to evolution. Here's the thing. The big thing about this documentary is that it's trying to expose the fact that there is gatekeeping in the scientific community against those who follow intelligent design, right? This documentary has been accused of being, and definitely kind of feels like it when you're watching it, a big conspiracy theory that there's just a giant conspiracy against those who are into intelligent design. Here's the thing, because I'm getting kind of tired of this. If there is a massive conspiracy against those who are into intelligent design, if there is a giant conspiracy, as it is often brought up, against Christianity, conservative morals, the woke people have an agenda against us. If that is all true, if all the conspiracy rhetoric is all true, when are we going to stop being surprised by it? Because one, there's always a conspiracy against us, allegedly. And two, pretty sure it's well documented in scripture that there's going to be people against us. So why are we surprised? If it is true that there is a giant conspiracy in academia against intelligent design, everything has to be evolution or you're not going to get your grants and all that. If it is all true, why are we surprised? Stop being surprised. That's my takeaway. Stop being surprised if there are conspiracy theories saying that you, conservative evangelical white Christian, there is a conspiracy against you. Stop being surprised. Because one, there's always one, apparently. And two, if you're going to follow Jesus, there's going to be people against you. Whether it's true or not that the conspiracies are true, yeah. Following Jesus means you're not going to be the most popular person on the street. I don't know how else to put it. It's in the Bible. You're not popular. The end. And this gets me to something I was preaching in a sermon recently. I was in the Sermon on the Mount. And I was talking about the Beatitudes for part. The sermon I was preaching was actually on the end, but the point of the end of the Sermon on the Mount, but the point of the sermon was to make people understand that we need to be understanding the entire Sermon on the Mount. So I just, went back to the beginning of with the Beatitudes and I read them all through. And I got to the last couple is like, blessed are you who are persecuted for my name's sake. And I stopped and I talked about how here in America, we love that part. We love to feel persecuted. I think our zealousness for being persecuted is more having to do with our nationalistic identity of feeling like, yes, I'm an American. I am fighting. I'm putting up my dukes. Fight me like a man. Fight me like an American man. I am a real American. Fight for the rights of every man. I think it has more to do with that than actually following Jesus. I really think that feeling persecuted has more to do with our nationalistic desires at heart. Because you know what else is in the Beatitudes? It also says, blessed are you who are peacemakers, who are merciful, who are uh, poor in spirit, who hunger and thirst for righteousness, humble, poor in spirit, merciful, peacemakers. You can be following Jesus doing that just as much as you're following Jesus being persecuted. I think we love to feel persecuted in Western American Christianity, even though right there and all throughout Scripture, it talks about how much following Jesus is a white flag of surrender, of humility, of weakness, of mercy, of being a peacemaker. Yeah, people are going to be against us. Believe your wild conspiracies. Please don't. But, believe your wild conspiracy. People are against you. It's in the Bible. People will be against you. It is also in the Bible to be a peacemaker, to be merciful, to hunger and thirst for righteousness. And I just wish we had more of that and less angry people ranting about how everyone is against them. We've gotten to a point where now people, me, are ranting about people ranting about being persecuted. The madness is maddening. This we're all mad here. So please stop being surprised. Stop being surprised. Not necessarily what I was hoping to take away from this documentary. I was hoping it had been, it's been like the 15 years or whatever since the last time I watched it. So I did not remember the fact that it actually talks very little about what intelligent design is. So I didn't imagine that my big takeaway was going to be this rant about, look, stop being surprised if people are against you. Stop. Follow Jesus. Just follow Jesus. Be merciful. Be a peacemaker. Do justly. Love mercy. Walk humbly with your God. The fruit of the Spirit has very little rage inside of it. Okay. So what's the takeaway when it comes to apologetics? Yeah, intelligent design is what I said earlier. Intelligent design, like the watchmaker illustration, can be a way to argue for the teleological existence of God. Cool. Watching this documentary could, as it did for me, lead you to worship God for the beauty of creation. Cool. Stop being surprised. Please. Can we just stop being surprised if there is actually a giant conspiracy against us? Please. You're not special. Like, I'm not really a person to like dunk on other people's emotions. I want people to feel validated in how they feel, but you're not special. God's people have been Christians and Jewish people in the Old Testament alike have been actually persecuted the entire time. Part of the gig. It's part of the gig, So I'm not going to do an arbitrary rating of this because I don't feel like that's the point. Again, as a piece of entertainment, a piece of content, it was good to watch. Knowing some of the deception that went into the making of it, and also the lack of actually making an argument for intelligent design kind of lowers the value I think we should put towards a documentary like that. But Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed, starring Ben Stein. That's all I got to say about that. Thanks for hanging out with me and listening to me rant for a while. Sorry. Again, if you are brand new to the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button and enable notifications to always on. And check out the podcast. Brand new episodes every Saturday. Got another one coming out this Saturday, again, within this context of apologetics and the relationship between faith and science. But that's it for me. I'll see you all here on the YouTube later. And until next time, this is Brandon signing off. Remind you, as always, that theology is for everyone. So keep on studying.